شلون كون خزيان مغبة أنا إيفا رومينا جوناس بشنتيتون أو خرزة doing business in America. وديو بتباقوخ ب Colonel Ralph Hodge قد إلى president من CEO of AFA Construction إلى veteran owned firm Gove America. تبقت ديان قوت خاطر دهلا قد بيخ قدني أطراي جانن قد صربزينا as جوسكارينا قد ادون بلاتنا كمسي بزيز جاني شاريلا ومود benefits اتنجو أمريكا قداني أدي أزغ تبقى بشأن قبل أخلي ميقرأ Hodge. Colonel Ralph, welcome to ANB.
Well, thank you, Romena. I'm honored and privileged that you would ask me to come and visit with you here. But before I get into how we do business as service disabled veterans or disabled veteran businesses, let me tell the audience that I've known you for 28 years, and you came into my office when I was stationed when I was the civil engineer for the Air Forces, 9 bases and 32 bases in 9 states in the western part of the United States. You came in and you told me that you wanted a job. You were a contractor and you wanted a contract over at Castle Air Force Base, California, and I picked up the phone and called the lieutenant colonel, and the rest is history. We've known each other for 28 years, and I hold you in very high esteem. Consider you a personal friend, my late wife and I, and also a strong, aggressive professional. I have done a lot of reading since I was a little boy on the Assyrian people, and I can't say that enough about how proud I am, how proud of a group of people you are. But having said that, I am from Washington, D.C. My great-grandparents moved to Washington, D.C. from Yorktown, where we won the revolution in 1776, I believe it was 77. And we moved up near the Capitol, and we've been there ever since. We moved there in 1880, to Washington, D.C., that is. And after I was born, we moved to a little town just south of Washington, D.C., across the river from Mount Vernon, the home of George Washington. And I lived in Maryland until I was 16 years old, and I was telling you this morning that we had the worst of all worlds. We were poor. 6 of us, all of whom have since preceded me in death. I went to a 1-room, 2-room school in the neighborhood, but we studied world geography, and I remember the Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and the fertile land that I know in the Mesopotamia, I believe it was. But then I went to high school. I told you 27 miles one way, sideways, on a bus that it was rickety. It took us 2 hours to get to school. We didn't have any showers in the school.
Why did you have to go 27 miles to school?
Because of the discrimination policies in the old days. Blacks could not attend schools with Caucasians, and we would pass 4 high schools en route, and that meant that you couldn't stop for any take care of your needs or nothing for the 2 hours you were on that bus. But I finished high school, and I was a pretty good athlete, and I won a scholarship to a college, and I stayed there a year and a half. And after a year and a half, I became a bit tired of looking like a bum. So I joined the Army at 19 years old and to see the world. And I almost saw all of it because they shipped me after basic training. I went to Korea, where I fought in the Korean War as an infantryman. That's a ground pounder on the front lines for 1 year. I was wounded once. I survived. I got out, went back to college, and took a degree in construction management, as well as a commission in the United States Air Force, because I wanted to fly. I always wanted to see what was behind the lines of the enemy. Mm-hmm. And I did not fly, but I became a civil engineer. And I spent 4 years in college, and after that I went to work for the city of Washington, D.C. as an engineering aide. And then when the Berlin Wall was erected in 1961, I'm such a hopped up person about the military, I decided to rejoin. And for the next 30 years I spent in low-level, mid-level, senior, and executive level management positions, and the last was in San Francisco, where we met. And I must say that over the years we've been just nothing but friends fraternally, just good friends. And as a matter of fact, when I retired in '91, you gave me my first job over at University of California, Berkeley. Remember that?
Yeah.
Neither one of us knew what was going on.
Construction work.
Construction work, and you were doing environmental remediation.
Yes.
But basically, that's it. My background is both European and Native American, and I guess we're black. I take pride in all of them. But if someone wants to look at something, it'd be interesting to look at the Declaration of Independence. My fourth great grandfather's first cousin is a signer. His name is General Thomas Nelson Jr., and his name is on the third column, and just above the name of his friend, personal friend, who was Thomas Jefferson. So if you ever get a chance to look at it, but we go back there. We are told that, and history will record it, that my seventh great grandfather was King George III's first governor of the Virginia colony. So with that, I went to serve the Air Force, went in the Air Force as a civil engineer in 1961, and in 1968 we were in Vietnam. And being the military man that I am, I went to Vietnam, and the battle was just almost as bad as it was in Korea. I was south of Saigon, about 100 miles, 50 miles east of Cambodia, and we were fighting the Viet Cong. At the time, I was a construction civil engineering manager, 200 men, that's civilians and military, and we fought. We didn't fight, but we were subjected to artillery and mortar fire maybe 3 nights out every weekend from August 1968 to March 69. After that after I returned to the States, went to Fort as a research and development officer, and spent a year as research and development officer, and I went to Command and Staff College, where I met a lot of the Persian officers with the big hats on their heads.
And you said you slept in Shaw's bed?
Yeah, oh yes, I did. At the time when, I think later on, this was long after, but I think the Shah was sick, I think, and he went to Lackland Air Force Base for medication, and the bed, there was one room in which he stayed. I had the privilege of being there, living there overnight, and I remember it was a brass bed, very, very ornate. Mm-hmm. So that's my claim to fame as far as the Shah goes. But I did meet a lot of Iranian officers. And one thing I learned about the officer corps is that all officers think alike. They have the same personalities, the same demeanor. And it was good to be around professionals. I noticed that they are from a different class. In our country, if you can compete and make it, you can go. And I think in that country, in Iran, you must be of a different class, I think. But that's it. And I went back to Europe for 3 years, and I worked at headquarters USAFE, which is the headquarters of the United States Air Force in Europe, at Ramstein Air Force Base. And I worked for a 4-star general who later became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Jones, and we became personal friends as captains, majors, and 4-star generals do. And then I returned back to the United States after a 3-year tour there, and went to the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. And there I became very close friends with a dear friend, I'm sure you know him, General Colin Powell. We were personal friends. And basically, then I went back to the Air Force Academy as a civil engineer there. Then I went to Alaska to become the facility engineer to Alaska, and then I returned back after 3 years in Alaska back to San Francisco. So I've made the full circle.
Yes. So Ralph, it's really interesting how you started from a humble beginning, and then you were able to work your way to a full colonel.
That's right.
And can you give us some word of wisdom, where that comes from, where that energy or that motivation comes from?
I would say that at an early age, although we were discriminated to some degree, our forebears always made us feel as if we were at the top of the heap. I would say this for the audience, that anyone who can't make it in America can't make it any place. There are challenges here, and I told you this morning that there's more freedom to do things in this country per inch than there is in other countries per mile. Yeah. If you want to start a business, no one is going to stop you. And if you play your cards correctly, people will help you to grow businesses. They will help you. I started out, when I got out of college, I started a business with a truck. And before I knew it, I had more tile work than I could stand. It's a case of economics, but if you can pick the right people with whom to relate or to learn or to draw experience from which to draw, there's no limit to what you can do in America. I don't consider anything other than the fact that it's a challenge. And the approach I would take would be two things. Be a minority within a minority. That's one of my philosophies. You don't understand that. But in every endeavor one pursues, 95% of the people in that endeavor are satisfied with status quo. Mm-hmm. They're satisfied. There's a 5% who will do a little bit more, and they are the managers. Mm-hmm. And this was my philosophy in the military. But that 5% can't do that 1% that's needed to get ahead. So I chose to be in that 5%. And then I chose to get in that 1%. Now, how does one get in the 1%? In the case of the military, I knew that I could wear a uniform properly and I could articulate. And I learned the language, French.
You learned French?
I learned French, yes, I did.
As an adult?
As an adult. I never went to school, but I learned it so I could beat everybody else on the base. There was another officer or enlisted man on that base in France whoever learned to speak the language. I took it about 3 weeks. I'm not bragging, but
You learned French in 3 weeks?
3 weeks, 3 weeks, yeah.
Wow.
Learned the 7 verbs to be, the ones we talk every day about. Mm-hmm. And after that, it was, you start adding verbs with adjectives and picking it up, and I learned it very well. And I've had the privilege of escorting the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the French Armed Forces. I speak French with people around the world. And Vietnam was a very good occasion. The French colonialized Vietnam for 100 years. Mm-hmm. And the elite Vietnamese spoke French fluently. And so I learned how I used that to a great advantage. And I must say that nobody don't feel second class, because nobody makes you feel second class but yourself. And there are so many opportunities in this country. I wish I was a younger man. I'd be a millionaire in about a week. But I chose the military. I love that. But to get back to your question, I would urge anybody. That's why I hate to use the word foreigners. That's why people come to this country and do so well. They see so many opportunities out there. Washing windows, repairing cars, like you, environmental engineering, and they use that. There's something about them that the people from other countries, they see everything that most people in this country don't see. You don't ask for handouts.
Right.
You make it on your own, and that's what I would recommend. Go out and look at some of the things that need to be done and do it. I remember Colonel Thompson told me in South Dakota, he said, "Ralph Hodge, you're going to go places, but let me give you an advice." He said, I, as a civil engineer, that's a facility engineer, I have responsibility for every little blade of grass on this post, on this airfield, and I can't do it all. And I got some officers out here who don't even care. So find something that I'm not doing well, and let's do it for me.
Oh, smart. Good advice.
This is it. So I would go out and find them. Heck, I remember I was at Andrews Air Force Base, where the president's plane is, mm-hmm. and I was given the command as a young lieutenant colonel to clean up the base. Well, I figured right away that the best way to do that is to find something on this base, two things that really pump people's attention. The first thing I did was I went to the arresting gear, place where there are these systems at the end of the runway that should the brakes fail, the plane keeps going. Should the brakes fail on the aircraft, the plane goes. So I decided one night I'd go down and see what these things look like. I went down to the pits, and I was appalled to see that those things hadn't been cleaned or nothing, and I don't know how long.
Wow.
This is the president's plane, everything else. So, a couple of that, I found the guy arresting himself in the midnight shift. He was asleep. And the place was dirty. There were oil rags all over the place. Well, the word got out that the colonel came down last night, and the word got back up to my boss, General Starr, and that takes you to the top, right? So,
Yep.
Find something that people aren't doing, that needs to be done, and do it. That's my philosophy.
Make it happen.
Make it happen. It'll happen. Washing windows, simple as that is. Shining shoes. People don't want to do that any longer.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Now they have for DVBEs,
Okay.
disabled veterans. There's an organization, correct?
Right. I will tell you that the state of California established a program called Disabled Veteran Business Enterprises, DVBE. And the purpose of that program was not only to help veterans to get a handle on business, but the state of California spends $6 billion per year in doing business, and they allot 3% of every contract that's awarded by the state every major contract that's awarded by the state, there must be at least 3% of the contract, whether it's in supplies or services, that must go to a disabled veteran-owned business. In some instances, if the competition is that close, the winning contractor can get up to 5% for incentive, having selected the DVBE, and that's DVBE, and that's the program. I would urge anyone who has served in the military and who has at least a 10% disability, go up to Sacramento, to the state of California Disabled Veteran-Owned Business Office Center, and apply. I brought a couple applications here, but you must have a minimum of 10% disability. I have 100.
You're 100%? You only got shot once.
That hurt. I didn't even get shot, I got a grenade. No, I have, in Korea, I had frostbitten feet.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
On my back.
Tell me about that one. That's pretty interesting.
What, frostbitten feet or Korea?
Well, both of them. The pigeon feet first, because it took me a while for me to figure it out.
Korea. Well, I arrived in Korea on December 19, I think the 10th, and we got on the front lines. You know what the front lines, that's the infantry.
Right.
Where the enemy is about 100 yards or so forth. I got there on the 17th of December, and we relieved the Turks. And the weather was unbearable. I think it was about 20 below zero. And we had summer clothing. We had not even issued our clothing because it came directly from the States. And we were put on the line. We got into Busan, caught a train up to about 20 miles south of the front lines, and moved up to the front lines and went into our holes with regular core-frame shoes, or not core-frame, just regular leather boots. And your feet get cold.
Yeah.
And what you do in the winter, they gave you 2 pairs of socks and 2 pairs of felt pads to put on your boot. After we got the boots, you take 1 pair of socks and wear them all day. And at night, you take them off. The next morning, you get up, you take those ones you've had all night and wring them out, and you put them right in here to get them dry. Then the next morning you put the dry ones on. And sometimes it got pretty damn cold. It was really cold, 20 below zero, and this went on all the time. From December through March, I was in a platoon called mortar platoon, and when you drop the mortar shells down the tube, you turn your head, and that's today guys put things in their ears.
Right.
So I lost some hearing.
Oh, I see.
And some other things. I done a post-traumatic PTSD. I still have issues with that after 60 years. So when you add all that stuff up, coupled with some other things, you'd come up to 80 to. I was 80% until recently. That the VA and in his wisdom, I was authorized 20 more percent. So I'm okay. But I do suffer with very, very seriously at night with PTSD. As far the other thing you wanted me to talk about was in Korea there were two things.
Yes.
What was the other one you recall?
The pork chop.
Pork Chop Hill. Oh yes, that happened on. There's a history will record that Pork Chop Hill and Old Baldy were the most fought over pieces of real estate in the Korean War. To give you an example, Pork Chop Hill could only hold 40 people, 45 people, and they were strategically located. Pork Chop is located about maybe 300 or 400 yards in front of our front lines, so that was an outpost where should we have an attack coming toward us, they could defend them off. It was suicide. So the Chinese decided on the 18th of 17th September decided we're going to take that hill because if we can break through that 300-yard gap, we're on our way to Seoul, and we can swing back and cut the Americans off from the rear. Well, we were told to hold at all costs, and we did, but we lost. I guess the battle took place about 6:30, lasted almost all night. Thanks to the Air Force, we were able to keep them off of us. We lost about 40 men in less than, but to see the amount of enemy that were coming across that field, just falling, I still remember that. And we held, and if you read in the books, if you read in Wikipedia, you will find, and there's a movie about it, it's not like the movie, you will find that it was a real tough battle. And the other thing I talked to you about was Kojido. Kojido is a place about 5 miles off the coast of Busan, Korea, South Korea, and 25 miles to the south to the west-southwest. We had 120,000 North Korean and Chinese prisoners stayed incarcerated there in very flimsy fences, 6,000 to a compound.
Wow.
Each of those compounds were allowed to have their own armies, their own foods, set up their flags. Now, if you can envision the American flag, the Chinese flag, the North Korean flag flying within the enemy flags of North Korea. Our compounds were next door.
Right.
So when we held reveille, they would hold theirs a little bit before us, maybe 2 minutes before us. That meant that we all stood reveille or retreated at the same time. Anyway, it's a story that Hollywood should tell, because it is I've never seen so much man's inhumanity to man in my life. The things that were done by Koreans to Koreans would make you shudder to think that men can treat their own countrymen that way. It is, as a matter of fact, the chap who is the owner of AIG, the insurance company, his name is Hank Greenberg. He was there, I didn't know him, but he wrote in his book that if the story was ever told, somebody would have gone to jail.
Really?
Because of the
inhumane way of treating people.
The cutting people's necks off, hands.
This is
North Koreans
doing it to their own people.
North Koreans, yeah. And the other thing which is so interesting, I hope someone will get a chance to read about the Kojido Island massive communist uprising that took place on the 7th of May. No, I stopped before then. This happened around the 13th or 14th. What happened on the 7th of May, they became so emboldened by our lack of what we're doing right now, that they decided they would capture our camp commander. So our General Francis T. Dodd, they asked him to come down to compound 76. We want to talk to you because, and this is the prisoners, because we want better treatment. So the general goes down there, and they timed it in such a manner that they were, each morning they would send, we call them honey bucket details up. That
right.
was honey bucket.
Yes, I do, but yeah, we don't want to tell us.
And they timed it so that the general would arrive at the same time the honey buckets would come in, and they took him in the compound with them. And we had to fight to get him out of there.
Oh my God, so they basically kidnapped him.
They kidnapped the general. I was across the road with a guy named Roger Petrie, and we literally saw them capture him. And he said that the first person shoots someone to court martial, and well, 6,000 men around him, they captured him. He was there for about 4 days, I believe. But it was one heck of a struggle.
Was the 4 days that they talked to him, or 4 days they tortured him?
They didn't torture him. He said he sent back out a note and said, I'm okay. But the genesis of that entire operation was the North Korean prisoners had a direct line to Panmunjom, where the peace talks were being held. Mm-hmm. And anything we did down there, 120 miles, no matter how far it is from Busan to Panmunjom, anything that was done down there was immediately gotten to the peace talks.
Wow.
In less than a millisecond. I don't know how they did it, but anything they wrote that. And if you ever look at the books, you'll see how they put up signs about how we're treating the prisoners. We weren't treating them badly. I wish to God we could have had the same clothing they had. But no, that was Kojido. It's one of the saddest stories in the annals of American military history, in my opinion.
Wow.
We looked bad.
So Ralph, how did you went to Korean War and you saw all that, and then you volunteered to go to Vietnam War? I mean, if it was me, I would be running, but you went in. So what motivated you to do that?
I wish I knew, and I've tried to think about that. But as a young man, and as a man with a uniform, you have a dedication to your friends. And I felt that even though I had 2 children at the time, I felt that if they went, I would go too, and I would feel bad if I came back home and I had never participated in a war. And I wasn't for the country per se. Mm-hmm. It was just your own DNA. Mm-hmm. Bear in mind, my 4th great-grandfather, one of them was a Captain Thomas Nelson Jr., who rode with General Washington. And the letter reads 18 August 1777. So that Revolutionary War. Then in the Civil War, my great-grandfather was with the Confederate side down in Virginia near Yorktown. Not Yorktown, near Cold Harbor. My father fought in World War I. 2 of my brothers fought in World War II. And 3 of us fought in the Korean War.
And you have children that are
I had
in the military.
children. I have my daughter, who is a major in the reserves. She's a doctor, anesthesiologist. Mm-hmm. I have a son that was almost lost his cookies in Kirkuk. In Iraq.
In Iraq. Oh, Kirkuk.
Mm-hmm. What do you say?
Kirkuk.
He remembers the day because he said he got caught in an ambush.
Yeah.
And he survived. He still remembers it. And then he went to Afghanistan.
From Iraq went to Afghanistan.
He went, yeah.
And how long was he there?
1 year.
1 year. Wow. I'm
He
sure
was
he has
also-
stories to tell.
Oh yeah, he has stories. He really does.
Do you know if he met any Assyrians while in Kirkuk?
He said he didn't meet many local people. They were busy moving up to is Mosul before to Kirkuk?
Okay, good.
He met. He said he would see them, but he was in the
In the compound?
compounds, yeah. And then he would go out on convoys.
Mm-hmm.
But he was yeah. And so my daughter's a major. She went to the academy, and she's now an anesthesiologist.
Good, congratulations.
So we've got. Now that's the end of my military family. I hope some others. I have 2 granddaughters now. I don't know whether they'll ever go and join or not, but we have a long military history.
It's in the genes, as you
It's
said.
in the genes. It really is. And it's not so much. I love my country. I'm probably more American than most Americans. I love it, but I think it's in the case of the military, you don't want to let your buddies down.
Yeah.
You never will. I can't even conceive of someone deserting from your friends. These are guys you live with. You know, we had one spoon in Korea. Spoons were worth maybe $100 because you only had one, and so you shared it with each other.
Wow.
Because didn't have any tool, no to eat with. We ate food called sea rations, and they were of 1944 vintage. This was 51.
Wow.
Corned beef hash, powdered eggs, powdered milk. And I should tell you about the powdered milk and the eggs. You had a mess kit that had 2 sides to it. You'd go through the line, and you would put a spoon of milk in the little wide pot. You throw your little powdered eggs on one side and a piece of slab of bacon on one side, and you had to put your cans, in those days, about 25 yards apart, so that if a shell came in, it wouldn't clean out the whole compound. So we'd get in line and we'd put the milk in, and by the time you got to the end, you'd see a little sheen of ice. You've seen ice on milk?
Yeah.
And you had 1 spoon.
That's it?
Maybe between 2 or 3 people.
Wow.
So yeah.
Oh, God.
It was all brothers.
Yeah.
And I guess that's where I learned how to survival instincts, and because I also learned in the military that despite all of the challenges that America face, when you're in that situation, there is no such thing as color. And I like that.
Yeah.
I found that, and you ask me why I joined the military, I was faced with those challenges out there in the world, but I knew that if I got in the military, I was that 1%.
Ralph, you have all these medals. Would you tell us what you got them for?
The first medal, I think, is the Legion of Merit.
Okay, and which one is that?